A spring meadow blanketed with purple once powered a thriving food economy, sweeter than molasses and safer than wheat until a single decision in May 1878 shattered it overnight. One livestock policy, one lost staple, and what followed was starvation, conflict, and near erasure. This was not nature taking its course. It was a system dismantled by design. How did a mainstay of survival become just another garden flower? The answer begins where most histories choose to end. In the prairies of the Pacific Northwest, what looked like wildflower meadows were in fact carefully engineered food systems. Indigenous families shaped these landscapes through a set of deliberate inherited practices that stretched back generations. Fire was the primary tool. Each fall, controlled burns swept across the fields, clearing away shrubs and young trees, recycling nutrients, and ensuring that comes would return in abundance the following spring. These burns were not random or destructive. They were timed and targeted, designed to keep the land open and productive, and to favor the blue cameras over encroaching species. After the fire, the work continued by hand. Digging sticks, long-pointed tools carved from hardwood, were used to loosen the soil and extract the bulbs. This digging did more than harvest food. It aerated the earth, broke up compacted ground, and stimulated new growth. Families removed the largest bulbs for baking and storage, while small bulbs and offsets were left behind, ensuring the next season's crop. Selective harvest was a form of stewardship, not extraction. One challenge stood out among the castes: the presence of death camellias, a toxic plant with nearly identical bulbs. During flowering, the difference was clear: death camas with its white blooms, blue camellias with its violet spikes. Indigenous harvesters weeded out the poisonous bulbs during this window, methodically removing them to protect the food supply. This vigilance created fields where blue cameras could thrive safely, and where accidental poisoning was rare. Recent ecological studies confirm the wisdom of these methods. A 2021 peer-reviewed experiment found that traditional harvest and burning, when practiced together, actually maintain or increase karma's density over time. Far from depleting the resource, disturbance in the right pattern made the system more productive. The cycle of burning, digging, and weeding was a form of agriculture, one that required intimate knowledge of place, timing, and plant behavior. In places like Oregon's Willamette Valley, the Kalapuya people maintained vast prairies through regular fire. These open landscapes supported not just kamas, but a suite of edible and medicinal plants, each one woven into the seasonal rhythm of burning, tending, and harvest. Ownership of Cayman's plots was often hereditary, marked by boundary stones or family memory. Rights to harvest were passed down, and unauthorized digging was met with social consequences. This was not a commons, but a network of managed farms, each plot the result of careful stewardship. When explorers and settlers first arrived, they entered a landscape shaped by centuries of intentional management. The purple fields were not wild. They were the visible result of a hidden civilization's agriculture. This system produced dependable calories, supported trade networks, and anchored communities to land. Its sustainability was not an accident, but the outcome of knowledge, labor, and tradition. An engineered meadow designed to last. A camas bulb harvested from the open prairie holds more than a promise of survival. Its chemistry is unique among staple foods of the world. Unlike wheat or potatoes, the raw bulb is packed with inulin, a complex carbohydrate that resists easy digestion. But tradition never called for eating karmas raw. Instead, families built earth ovens lined with hot stones, layered bulbs with leaves and soil, and then set a slow fire. For the next 24 to 36 hours, the prairie itself became a kitchen. Heat and worked together, breaking down inulin to fructose, transforming the bulbs into something sweet, sticky, and deeply nourishing. By the time the oven was opened, the harvest had changed. The cooked bulbs were dark, fragrant, and as sweet as any molasses, Lewis and Clark, arriving at White Prairie in September 1805, tasted CMA's bread offered by Nez Perce women. Clark's journal records the impression: sweet, good, and nourishing. For the expedition, exhausted and hungry, this was more than hospitality. It was a lifeline, a direct introduction to a food system built on biochemical insight and patience. This slow sugar was more than a flavor. It was a currency. After baking, the bulbs could be mashed and pressed into dense cakes, dried in the sun, and stored for months. These cakes traveled along trade routes exchanged for salmon roots and woven goods. In some regions, Camillas cakes ranked second only to smoked fish as a trade staple, a testament to their value and reliability. Archaeological finds confirm the scale. Single earth ovens sometimes held more than 100 pounds of bulbs, enough to feed dozens or to fill a canoe bound for distant markets. The sweetness of camos also filled a role that cane sugar and honey would later dominate. In communities where refined sugar was unknown, camas was a treat for children and a sweetener for celebrations. Its slow release energy, combined with the stability of storage, made it safer than wheat in years of drought or crop failure. Where annual grains could fail or spoil, camos persisted underground, ready for harvest as long as the land was managed and the ovens were tended. This was not a minor wild food, but a staple engineered for both taste and security. The prairies that produced camas were in effect carbohydrate reserves, living banks of sugar and energy shaped by fire, digging, and trade. The loss of these systems would mean more than the disappearance of a flour. It would mean the collapse of a calorie economy and the unraveling of a network that linked families, villages, and entire nations across the Northwest. In the spring of 1878, Big Camas Prairie in southern Idaho became a battleground long before shots were fired. The prairie was known for its dense stands of blue camas, and it drew Bannock and Chaussonier families each year for the harvest. That season, when the band arrived to dig, they found the fields already torn apart. Settlers' hogs left to roam free had rooted through the meadows and devoured bulbs before they could be gathered. The immediate food supply for hundreds was gone. The Idaho State Historical Society called this act the immediate spark for what would become the Bannock War. Tensions had been rising for weeks. Bannock leaders had protested the loss of their staple, warning that livestock on Camillas grounds would mean hunger. But warnings went unheeded. Settler priorities favored cattle and hogs, and the logic of open range outweighed treaty rights and traditional harvest. The Silvey brothers, Will and Tom, were among the ranchers running livestock across the prairie. Their cattle camp became a flashpoint. On May 30th, 1878, violence broke out at the Silvey camp. Bannock warriors confronted the herders. Lou Kendler and George Nasby, both working at the camp, were shot. Will Silvey survived. Tom Silvey was away delivering beef to a nearby mining town. The attack was not random. It followed weeks of direct confrontation over the destruction of cases. Bannock testimony from the period, though, filtered through settler and military reports, points to a sense of desperation. The act was a deliberate attempt to defend the last reliable food source. Retaliation followed quickly. Settlers and local militia struck back, and the conflict escalated from a food dispute to open warfare. By early June, United States Army units under Brigadier General Oliver O. Howard were moving into the region. Buffalo Horn, a former Army scout now leading his people in resistance, gathered roughly 200 warriors. The campaign stretched across southern Idaho and into northeastern Oregon with skirmishes, raids, and running battles that lasted through the summer. The human cost mounted. Buffalo Horn was killed in battle on June 8, 1878. Bananook and allied Paut-Pute groups retreated westward, pursued by Howard's troops. The campaign ended in September, when the last Bannock fighters were captured in Yellowstone Park. The United States government spent $500,000 on the campaign. That sum underscored the scale of the crisis. For the Bannock, the cost could not be measured in dollars. The destruction of the Camillas harvest meant more than hunger. It meant the collapse of a food system, the loss of autonomy, and the transformation of a landscape from a place of gathering to a geography of conflict. Big Cass Prairie, once the ground of abundance, had become a flashpoint. The decision to turn hogs loose on Camas fields was not simply an agricultural mistake. It was a structural erasure, a single act that severed a people from their source of survival and set off a chain of events that would echo for generations. Across the Pacific Northwest, the fate of Camas prairies was decided not by a single event, but by a slow, systematic process. After the wars and the forced removals, fire was no longer welcome on the land. In the Willamette Valley, where blue cameras once turned the ground violet each spring, state and federal policies banned traditional burning in the 1830s and the 1840s. Without fire, shrubs and young trees crept in, shading out the bulbs that depended on open ground. Within a few generations, the engineered meadows that had anchored entire food economies began to vanish. Today, less than 1% of the Willamette Valley's original upland prairie survives, a statistic echoed in conservation assessments across the region. The rest has been converted to farmland, pasture, or lost to unchecked forest growth. Bureaucratic management replaced inherited stewardship. Where families once timed burns and dug bulbs by hand, land agencies categorized prairies as range, swamp, or wasteland, places to be improved, drained, or plowed. The language of food vanished from official records. Cass fields became invisible to policy. Their value measured only by what they could yield for livestock or crops. In the new order, any plant that interfered with these priorities was reclassified as a weed. This logic persists at Idaho's Camas Prairie Centennial Marsh Wildlife Management Area, 6,240 acres established in 1987. State documents detail a weed control regimen designed to maintain habitat and forage. The list is explicit. Milestone, a brand of amapyrolate 24D and glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, are mixed with blue dye and sprayed across the meadows to control invasive forbs and thistles. The same ground that once fed hundreds now receives annual applications of herbicides. Each treatment mapped and logged in agency plans. The goal is not to restore a food system, but to manage a landscape for wildlife and weed suppression. The rationale appears technical, even neutral. Yet, the effect is cumulative. When a perennial food plant depends on disturbance, on fire, digging, and open ground, policies that suppress these actions become a slow form of eraser. Once prairies are managed as weed problems, the plants that once fed entire communities become economically inconvenient to protect. The vocabulary of management, noxious, invasive, target species, replaces the language of harvest and trade. What was once a carbohydrate reserve is now a zone for chemical intervention. Its history buried beneath a cycle of spraying and mowing. There is no single villain in this story. Instead, there is a system, a set of policies, priorities, and technical fixes that over decades transformed a living food landscape into a category on a weed control spreadsheet. The result is visible across the Northwest. Vast prairies reduced to fragments. Blue cameras surviving only in ditches, roadsides, and occasionally in the margins of a wildlife management plan. The knowledge that once kept these systems alive is now rare, and the calorie economy they sustained is all but invisible to the agencies that manage what remains. At the edge of the Sawtooth foothills in Idaho, a new chapter for Cass began in 1987. The state established the Camas Prairie Centennial Marsh Wildlife Management Area, setting aside 6,240 acres in Camas County, Idaho. This ground, once the scene of food collapse and conflict, became a focus for organized restoration. The late May bloom now draws attention for its beauty. But beneath the flowers, a coalition works to revive the food system that once thrived here. The Shoshone-Bannock tribes lead the effort, drawing on their deep connection to the prairies. Their leadership is not symbolic. It shapes priorities, methods, and the pace of change. The Idaho Department of Fish and Game manages the site. balancing wildlife goals with the demands of restoration. The Rodil Institute brings expertise in soil health and organic systems, while Idaho State University and the Bureau of Land Management contribute research and logistical support. Each partner brings a different set of tools, but the central aim is shared to return cameras to a place of abundance and security. Restoration here is more than planting bulbs. It means negotiating the use of fire, testing the effects of controlled burns, and fencing off patches to protect them from grazing at key times. It means monitoring the soil, mapping the spread of cameras, and tracking the return of other native species. Each step is informed by both traditional knowledge and scientific study. This is a living experiment, one that looks to the past for guidance, but is shaped by present-day partnership. It is not a simple return to what was lost. It is a deliberate, organized comeback grounded in collaboration and respect for the land's history. In a laboratory on the Olympic Peninsula, trays of roasted Cayman's bulbs are loaded into a freeze dryer. The goal is simple: to see if this ancient food preserved in new ways can match the longevity of modern staples. Tribal food security planners working with scientists are testing whether freeze-dried cameras could last not just through a single winter, but for decades. The aspiration is borrowed from other preserved foods where freeze-drying can lock in nutrients and flavor for a generation. While the experiment is ongoing, the hope is grounded in traditional practice. For centuries, Karma's bulbs were baked in earth ovens, mashed and dried into cakes that could survive months of storage and journeys across trade routes. Now, with the help of contemporary technology, the same logic is being applied to ensure that Kums can serve as a reliable reserve in uncertain times. Recent archaeological work at Oregon State University reinforces the practicality of these efforts. Excavations of ancient earth ovens scattered across the Will Valley reveal a pattern of long-duration cooking and careful storage that matches what food chemistry now confirms. The inulin in raw cause is converted into fructose only through slow, sustained heat, producing a sweet, digestible bulb that can be dried and kept for months without spoilage. Laboratory analysis supports what generations of indigenous cooks already knew. The process is essential, not optional. It is this combination ancestral knowledge validated by modern science that gives new relevance to Kamas as a food security crop. In the push for sustainable, resilient carbohydrates, a plant once sidelined as a wildflower is returning to the center of the conversation, not as a novelty, but as a proven solution for the future. Today, blue camas blooms in restored meadows and catalog gardens. Its legacy is shaped by policy as much as biology. As food insecurity rises and prairie habitat falls below 1% of its historic range, the lesson holds. Calories can be legislated away as easily as weeds. What we choose to manage or erase still decides who eats. Share your thoughts below.